People often speak of racism as if it were a series of isolated, unfortunate events. They might point to slavery as a dark chapter, or Jim Crow as a regrettable era, believing each ended, leaving a more enlightened present. This narrative is a dangerous myth. It lets us think today's problems are new, disconnected from the nation's foundations. Racism in the United States is not discrete episodes. It's a continuous, adaptive system. It began with the brutal logic of chattel slavery and has never truly disappeared. It has changed its face. New language, new laws, new mechanisms, all serving the same goals: the control of non-white bodies, the extraction of cheap labor, the preservation of a racial hierarchy. To understand the present, follow this unbroken chain through history. From a slave patrol in 1850 to an ICE raid in 2025, not as far apart as we think. The core principles stay the same. The logic that once justified owning a person has evolved into the logic that justifies mass incarceration, militarized policing in certain neighborhoods, aggressive detention and deportation of immigrants of color. These are branches of the same poison tree. Each branch draws life from the same roots of racial caste, planted centuries ago and tended since. This essay will trace that line step by step. We'll examine how legal and social machinery used to control Black people was repurposed and refined, and how those tools were later applied to other marginalized groups, especially immigrants of color. The goal: make the invisible system visible, connect the plantation, the prison, and the detention center. By understanding how it was built and how it adapts, we reveal its weaknesses. Confronting this continuous history is necessary to begin dismantling it. The tone must be calm and firm. Clarity, not detachment. When we see the system for what it is, divisive rhetoric loses power. We see the shared struggle. We recognize the fight against anti-Black racism, and the fight for immigrant rights are fronts in the same war for justice. The system of racial control in the United States was born from chattel slavery. From the early 1600s until its formal abolition in 1865, slavery was not merely a labor system. It was the nation's primary economic and social engine, built entirely on a foundation of racial ideology. Laws were written to define Black people as property or chattel, stripping them of all legal rights and human dignity. This legal framework was essential. It created a permanent, inherited status of subordination, making it possible for a burgeoning nation to build immense wealth from the cultivation of cotton, sugar, tobacco. This was the first and most explicit instance of a legal system designed to subjugate a group based solely on race. To maintain this brutal order, a sophisticated apparatus of control was necessary. This apparatus was both physical and psychological. Physically, slave patrols were established as the first form of organized policing in many parts of the South. These patrols had the authority to stop, question, and violently punish any Black person found outside a plantation without permission. Their purpose was clear: to monitor and restrict movement, suppress rebellion, and instill constant fear. This model of proactive, race-based surveillance set a powerful precedent for law enforcement in America. A powerful ideology justified slavery, painting Black people as inferior, dangerous, and incapable of self-governance, spread through sermons, scientific treatises, and popular culture. It taught white society to view Blackness itself as a marker of criminality and threat. This dehumanization allowed ordinary people to participate in or tolerate extraordinary cruelty. The system taught that controlling Black people was a necessity for social order and safety. Slavery did more than exploit labor. It created the very architecture of systemic racism. It established components that would persist: a legal system that codifies racial inequality, a policing system for racial surveillance, and a social narrative that justifies control through dehumanization. The end of the Civil War and the 13th Amendment did not dismantle this architecture. It merely forced it to find a new form. The belief that people could be controlled and exploited for economic order was now firmly in place, ready to be applied in new ways. With slavery's end, Southern elites turned to Black codes to replicate bondage. Ordinary activities, vagrancy, breaking curfew, speaking loudly, became crimes to reassert control. Fines led to leasing. Companies paid, states delivered coerced labor, deadlier than slavery. Jim Crow mandated separation everywhere, enforced by police and terror. Voting rights were stripped to ensure no political power to change the laws. The language changed, but labor control, social subordination, and disenfranchisement stayed the same. In the 20th century, control adapted in northern cities through policing and housing policy. Disproportionate patrols, stops, searches, and arrests built a hostile status quo. The war on drugs framed addiction as crime, not health, justifying forceful policing. Racially coded rhetoric fueled mandatory minimums and harsher crack sentences. The prison population exploded, over 2.2 million by the 2000s, disproportionately Black and Latino. Communities were emptied, labor extracted, voting rights stripped, a race-neutral language with racial outcomes. U.S. immigration policy long intertwined with race, exclusions and quotas to preserve a white ideal. As legal pathways narrowed and need rose, the border militarized under racialized narratives. Surveillance, control, and criminalization honed on Black communities were aimed at immigrants of color. In 2003, DHS created ICE, consolidating and intensifying interior enforcement. Raids project state power, instilling fear to discourage entire communities from asserting their rights. Supposedly race-neutral in text, in practice, they target predominantly Latino workplaces and neighborhoods. Black immigrants, a smaller share of the undocumented, are detained and deported at disproportionate rates, amplifying anti-Black bias. Like slave patrols, ICE surveillance monitors and restricts movement of a racialized population. People fear going to work, to school, even to the hospital. A minor infraction, or none at all, can lead to capture and deportation. Lives are upended based on perceived status, bound up with race and origin in the system's eyes. ICE removes those deemed undesirable and disciplines others through fear. The uniforms and legal justifications changed. The goal, state control of non-white populations, remains. The ICE raid is the 21st century evolution of a long line of racial enforcement tactics. Two constants of racial control: economic exploitation and deliberate family separation. From slavery to sharecropping, to prison labor to undocumented work, maximum labor is extracted while bonds are broken. Threats of deportation suppress wages, sidestep safety, and silence complaints, creating a permanent disposable underclass. The auction block echoes in boarding schools and border cages, strategic dehumanization and deterrence. A Mother's Pain in Texas, 2018, mirrors Virginia, 1850. The system keeps using the same tools of pain. The evidence is clear. The system that began with slavery has not been eradicated. It has adapted. From patrols to Jim Crow, the war on drugs to mass incarceration, to militarized immigration enforcement. Acknowledging this unbroken history is essential. We must reject the myth that racism is a relic of the past. We must teach and tell the true story in schools, media, and public discourse, connecting the historical dots. This truth is not to paralyze with guilt, but to empower with understanding. Armed with understanding, we must demand fundamental policy changes, end the gears of the machine, abolish racial profiling, end cash bail and mandatory minimums, create accessible pathways to citizenship, and demilitarize police and border enforcement. Re-envision public safety from within communities, not imposed upon them. Dismantle the for-profit prison and detention industry. These are necessary steps to align our laws with our values. We must make sustained investments in communities' long-denied resources. Fund schools, affordable housing, community-based healthcare, and job creation in Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. True safety comes from well-being, not surveillance and punishment. We must change the narrative. Challenge fear-based rhetoric that dehumanizes. Amplify voices of those directly impacted to guide action. Systemic racism was built by policies and narratives. It can be dismantled by new ones. The work is long and difficult, but not impossible. By seeing the system clearly, calling it by its true name, and joining together in a shared struggle for justice, we can finally break the chain and begin to build a nation where safety, dignity, and freedom are for everyone. What replaces myth is clear-eyed understanding and collective action to honor liberty and justice for all. Understanding today's ICE raids requires acknowledging an unbroken historical line. Only then can we confront racialized enforcement as the latest chapter in a centuries-long American story.